Yo, Toshi here. In today's video, this is gonna be a blast to the past for a lot of you. This patch has a bunch of characters that have not seen play or relevance in the current meta for quite some time. Now, these characters have received numerous buffs, and the other characters in this patch are also characters that can work either alongside these characters or work alongside the characters that these designated characters want to use or be used with rather, which I'll explain more in the video. So this really is a very niche patch if I'm being honest. So for, I would say, a good portion of you, you're probably going to skip every single character in this patch, and that's totally okay. Honkai Star, at least the beauty of Honkai Star right now, especially with them bringing back the dot characters and buffs to characters like Silverwolf, we're starting to see more playstyles rise back into the in-game meta, which is exactly where the game should take its PvE focus, in my opinion, having all of the in-game teams be meta viable. This video is sponsored by Loot Bar. I was able to save on Stellar Jades with the cheaper prices they have compared to the typical in-game top-up version. The process is very safe and simple as it takes cheapest conversion currency rate and then presents to you many discounted prices, which you can then use with various coupons to save on an even more amount of Stellar Jades. The transaction is smooth and simple. Enter your UID in the top right corner. Once you choose your preferred method of payment, you will within a matter of moments receive your purchase on Narek shards, which you can then convert to Stellar Jades. One thing I like about Loot Bar is that you get the first time top up bonus for your Stellar Jades, which is a massive help when it comes to making the videos, because that means more pools for the rate up character. Check out the link in the description to save on your Stellar Jade purchases, and thanks again to Loot Bar for sponsoring this video. So the first character we have is Hysilens. Now what makes Hysilens super duper good is that she is essentially an AoE version of Luca. Now if you remember back in the day, using Luca alongside Kafka was the best dot variant you could use for a single target. And to be honest, it still is relatively decent for a single target. The only issue is that for one, there isn't very many, physical weak enemies in the in-game, and there really isn't, again, many single target fights you want to use the dot team in anyways, because we have better designated single target teams in the game right now. But one thing that dot has always been pretty good at is AoE content, and that's pretty much why dot has remained relevant and pure fiction ever since its debut, right, with the release of Black Swan and 2.0. And that's why Luca has been phased out of the dot teams eventually. Now, fast forward to the release of Hysilens, and you now have an AoE version of a character that was previously good for designated content. Now, the thing is about Hysilens is that she'll be really good in all of the contents because she has more AoE in her kit. Now, TLDR, for those of you that are maybe new to the game or don't really remember much about the dot playstyle and the weakness break effects and what exactly each specific dot does do, because it's been quite some time since Luca has been in the in-game meta with, Kafka dot. Long story short, Luca has Physical Bleed. Physical Bleed is essentially a dot that does max HP of the enemy, which is the strongest variation of damage over time we have in the game currently. Now, what makes Hysilens, again, unique with the physical dot is that she can apply it on an AoE, which means she gets a ton of value in other contents like Pure Fiction, Apocalyptic Shadow, where the enemies are going to have a ton of HP. That's where she's going to shine, and even in single target scenarios, her damage is not going to fall off because of that physical dot. So she's one of the best characters you can use, or probably the best character you can use alongside Kafka when we get into her teams. And the weakness break effect allows you to take advantage even more of having the physical dot onto the enemy. You're going to see this character shred bosses. Now, real talk, in all honesty, you probably just want to take your Black Swan relics and give it over to Hysilens, because Hysilens is going to be the new best partner you can pair alongside your Kafka. If I'm being completely honest here, you can probably still run Black Swan in a team alongside Kafka, but it's going to be a team without a sustain. Or maybe you do replace Ruame with your Huo, which we'll get into in just a moment. But for the most part, Black Swan will be replaced by Hysilens for the in-game dot teams, because Hysilens is going to be a better version of essentially what Black Swan wants to do in her kit. Her debuffs are a lot more like actually present, like the defense down. She has attack down as well, which makes you take less damage. So in teams with like Woe, for like your squishy teams, it'll be pretty good, right? It helps a lot with mitigating the damage you receive from the enemy. And her damage just in general is a lot better. And she detonates too, which means, again, you are dishing out way more damage than you ever would in a variation of the dot with Black Swan. But yeah, that's the beauty of Hysilens. Because she's built the same way as Black Swan, you essentially want a ton of effect hit rate to maximize the passive of the character, giving her damage boost, and to efficiently land her damage over time. You can actually just take your relics you have on your Black Swan and throw them over to your Hysilens. Now, there is a better planar set in the game currently that does increase your damage over time and attack percentage, right? With the addition of, I believe it came out in 3.4. It might have been 3.4, correct me if I'm wrong. That new dot planar set allows you to dish out more damage over the course of the fights because it does have higher buffs provided than or higher stats rather provided than the previous Pan Cosmic commercial you probably used on your Black Swan and maybe other dot characters. But it saves you a lot of time farming, knowing that you can just take your relics from your Black Swan and just throw them over to your Hysilens. You probably just want to make sure that you either have a physical damage bonus spear or an attack percentage bonus spear. So yeah, for a lot of you, this is probably the easiest pull ever if you are a fan of the dot playstyle. And long story short, this is the easiest, character to build because you already have pre-existing relics you can just take away from your Black Swan to throw over onto this new character. Now, last but not least, I'll go into some of the teams you can use with her. So for the first team, we have Kafka Black Swan. This is where you would throw in Hysilens as your third character, and then Robin if you are looking to run a sustainless setup. The reason why Robin is much better in the sustainless setup versus Rame is because Robin gives team-wide action forwarding. Now, Robin also gives attack percentage, which is actually pretty darn good. Well, not attack, but just like attack, right? To the whole team based on her attack. To the whole team, which is like pretty dang good, considering all of the dot characters scale off of attack, which will probably be like this way forever. It's really nice. Really, really nice. Really nice. And then the physical damage she does provide too also does help with the residual damage because all the characters in the team will be attacking. I say the one thing you may have to worry about is skill point consumption. I notice this whenever I run dot teams. Black Swan is usually like you want to apply the defense down, but there's a lot of the time where you're unable to apply the defense down. So maybe even other characters in the slot of Black Swan might be better. Like for instance, the newly buffed Swordwolf, who we'll talk about later on in the video. But you can run this sustainless setup with your Hysilens if you really, really do want to keep using Black Swan with Kafka. And then we have the Ruame variation. So we have Kafka, and then this would be like where you would either slot Hysilens, right? Or Black Swan as of right now. And then you have Ruame, and then you would just run your sustained character, your defensive option. I personally use Hysilens because she's like the only defensive option I really like using nowadays. She gives a ton of HP to the team. She has her own personal damage. She feels pretty darn nice. But her woe is the best of both worlds because she gives attack percentage and energy to the team, which increases your final damage of the dot and the detonation like crazy. I will say one of the things I do miss about the dot teams, or rather one of the things I really wish that we could find a way to make use of in the dot teams, is the break effect that Ruame does provide. The problem is with break effect is that it's really hard to build into your characters of the dot team or archetype because these characters want attack percentage, speed, and sometimes effect hit rate depending on the character, right? So it's really, really hard to slot in break effect in substats. So the only way you really get it for free is from characters like Ruame and Harmony MC, who you obviously don't want to use in your dot teams. So unfortunately, it really feels like we'll never make use of break effect, even though it was something you could do back in the day, because the detonation of the dot you would place into the enemy with the break damage you would get after hitting the enemies, right, and breaking their toughness back in the day, because enemies had not as much HP as they do now, actually added up quite a bit, right? You did quite a bit of damage and it was actually decently viable. It's just like nowadays it really isn't the case anymore. But that's Hysilens TLDR. And these are the teams you can use with the character if you decide to roll for her. Following 3.4, Kafka has received numerous buffs that have helped her tremendously. Now, aside from pure fiction, this dot variation with just Kafka and Black Swan, probably, if you are using dot still, is pretty mid, if I'm being honest. The damage isn't high still. Even though Kafka does more detonation, she has more damage overall to provide to the team, right? And just gives more supportive utilities, right? She still does suffer to clear in-game contents aside from pure fiction. Because again, in AoE scenarios, dot team is still really darn good. But aside from that, it really is hard to cleave through the amount of HP the enemies do have in in-game. Which again, you'll find why Hysilens is a power pool for the dot team, because you deal max HP percentage of the enemy. So the more HP they add to the in-game contents, the more damage you're going to do with Hysilens. So she really is a prophecy character. The foreseeable future, the character is going to continue to get better and better. So her first Eidolon allows her to increase the dot damage taken by the enemy by 30%, which is actually pretty darn good. With the high base chances of this, you don't need as much effect hit rate as you think you do, which makes this really, really nice for a character like Kafka, who you want to stack a lot of attack on anyways. And then we have Eidolon 2, which did get recent buffs, increasing the damage dealt from 25 to 33. Now, in my opinion, this could use a little bit more of a buff. I think an 8% extra damage, over time dealt increase by all allies is okay. I feel like if they made it 40%, because it is a Eidolon 2, that is a pretty decent investment for anyone that doesn't already have it or doesn't get lucky, right, pulling on it. But I would just stop, honestly, at E1 to E2, because this is going to be the most value you get from the character in general for the dot team. Most likely E1 would be a very solid, or the best stopping point rather. Now, honestly, don't sleep on the light cone of Kafka. One of the best things about this light cone is that it still does provide a damage over time effect on the passive compared to just any other light cone in the game for the dot team. The lightning dot it does provide is really, really nice, because now you have more dot procs. And for a team like Black Swan, this just allowed you to deal more damage with the Arcana stacks. It felt really clunky to use Kafka without her light cone for a long time. Recent buffs made her a lot better to use without her light cone, but her light cone is still really, really valuable. I honestly am surprised they didn't even buff her light cone, which did surprise me. I think they didn't buff a lot of the light cones in the game for the buffed characters, which again surprised me. A little weird, right? I think especially Silverwolf, moving into her, really needed buffs for a light cone. Beside the point, this is a nice pickup for your Kafka if you don't already have it. But it's totally fine if you don't, because even Good Night and Sleep Well, which I'm sure more of you have at this point, maybe even with some super impositions, so some dupes, it's really good, right? You get 72% damage bonus, right? Especially considering that Hysilens is going to be applying a lot of dots onto the enemy. You'll stack this really, really quick. My Kafka's build hasn't changed, I'll be honest. My Kafka is really, really slow. But to be fair, I use her in a team of Ruan Mei, so her attack is exceptionally high. And she is using a lightning damage bonus spear in her signature light cone, so she does get more speed and take advantage of having this high attack. But I'll be honest, I could farm better, right, and get more premium stats on my Kafka. I just haven't taken the time to do so, and only take advantage of the 12% damage bonus and not the 18%. So I'm missing out on some efficiency in general. But you get the idea of how you would build Kafka. You would use her with the old Prisoner and Deep Confinement set, because this is the best set you can use for all characters. I don't see this changing anytime soon. Think of this as the essentially quantum set for dot characters. Funny enough, you can still use the quantum set on your dot characters if you already have that on your characters, right? But the Prisoner and Deep Confinement is still really, really nice for the characters. Also do remember that you could use the other set in the domain as well for Kafka, if I remember, because this does give you a ton of extra attack, right? Which does add up to being relatively close to the Prisoner and Deep Confinement. But the defense ignore is too good to pass up. For Kafka exclusively, because she does have a follow-up attack, she could make use of that. But long story short, actually I don't even know, because of recent buffs, she has more than one follow-up attack, so I don't even, correct me if I'm wrong, maybe it is worse on the character now because of the recent changes to the character, but farming this set, you can't go wrong. And then Glamoff Planar set is still really competitive on the character and the dot teams. But I wouldn't be kidding if I didn't say this. The new Planar set for dot characters in general just gives more value and doesn't have this clunky, criteria of needing a certain speed in order to make advantage of or take advantage of the extra stats provided. So that's one thing to take into consideration as well. The teams I mentioned for Kafka will be the same as the teams I mentioned for Hysilens. The only difference is if you are so keen on just using Kafka and rolling for Eidolons for Kafka and you don't want Hysilens, then of course you would just need to make use of Black Swan, because there really is no other way to play Kafka nowadays, because unfortunately the enemies have so much HP. You need to take advantage of another character that can help you dish out more damage on the detonation from the dots. And if you don't have Black Swan or Hysilens, your options are pretty much nothing, right? You might as well just not even use the character, if I'm being honest. So now we have Silverwolf. Silverwolf is the character I most likely glaze the most of all time. And I think the reason why is because I just love whatever this character is relevant in the meta. Super fun, very rewarding to play, is honestly a lot more engaging than the general characters this game has ever released. And whenever she is meta, it feels like the game is in a pretty decent spot, if I'm being honest. Now, when I say meta, I'm not talking like, oh my god, she is the best character in the game. No, she's not the best character in the game. Far from it. But she is a very strong pick to use in the in-game contents if you already have the character or you are looking to pick her up. Think of her as a Cypher, basically. She is another Cypher. The only difference is that compared to Cypher, she doesn't have a bunch of personal true damage she can throw into the enemy at the end of the fights or throughout the fights. That's just not how the character works. She doesn't have follow-up attack in her team either, or kit either. So you can't use her in the follow-up attack team just like you would Cypher if you really want to use her there. So she's not the craziest character you can use with a character like Fei Zhao. That's fine. But everything else the character does provide is extremely good. And unlike Cypher, you could still use her in the quad-up team. And she actually is pretty decent to use in a team with Rappa if you don't have a character like Fugue and you want to apply the imaginary weakness into the enemy. Believe it or not, she actually is pretty decent to use with Rappa. Not the best, but you can somewhat get the job done, which is pretty nice too. So a quick TLDR of the character, what changed Silverwolf. She now has an AoE attack with her ultimate, which means you now apply defense down on all of the enemies, much like Pela, right? And Cypher with her elemental skill. And then your skill with the weakness implant now prioritizes the first character's type in your party slot. So if you have, for instance, Rappa, and you want to apply the imaginary weakness, you would just put Rappa in the first slot of the team, and you would just apply the imaginary weakness to any enemy that you throw it on that does not already have that weakness, which is really nice. And another thing to take into consideration too is that when you do kill that enemy, the weakness then does spread to other enemies, which means that she becomes a character that you don't have to use your skill a lot on, much like you would use on back in the day, right? If that makes sense. And then she does regenerate energy at the start of the battle and her turn, which means that you now get your ultimate in the first turn, and you get your ultimate a lot more over the duration of the fight, which is I cannot express to you how tremendous of a buff that is for the character, because now that means this character virtually has 100% uptime. No, she has 100% uptime on her debuffs she places to the enemy. It is extremely good and makes her extremely flexible now in a bunch of teams. So she is a power pull. But that is just the surface level of the buffs provided to the character. The last one that is massive, right? And maybe is not, depending on how you're building the character. She now gets more attack from having effective rate on her build, and she doesn't need as much effective rate as she used to need. So now, because she is getting a lot more attack, it makes more sense to use her as a sub DPS crit base oriented character. And she got recent multiplier buffs to her ultimate. So now she dishes out a ton of damage considering it is an AoE attack. It's almost as if the devs forgot that giving her an AoE attack and buffing the multipliers and defense down, by the way, before she does do the damage in the ult, would not make this character like broke. I mean, let's be real. It is absolutely broken. It is one of the best ultimates in the game currently because of everything it does. So I'll show my build really quick. My build has not changed ever since I finished building it. And I believe I finished this build like probably around the time this character, like 1.3 probably, and her build hasn't changed. So I've been using, or not 1.3, because I'm using the Pendant Colony Planar set, which I'll get into in just a moment, because I use her exclusively for quantum characters. And I guess if I use her ROP, I probably need to replace it, but that doesn't really matter anyways. Long story short, Quantum set is extremely good and probably still the best relic set you can use on the character if you already have this relic set farmed for the character, because you're able to take advantage of not only the quantum damage bonus, right, because she is a quantum character first and foremost, you also do get a ton of defense ignore, and that does help with dishing out damage on a character that already shreds the enemy's defense, so it increases her final damage like crazy. In the planar set that I am using Penacony, because again, I do use her quantum characters like Custoris, Tribi, so on and so forth, you increase the damage of the quantum characters, but other planar sets give you like either an attack bonus you give to the first party member, which is the recent Harmony set, Harmony-like set, right? The Lukasha's Waterscape, or yeah, Lukasha set. You can use this on the character. It gives more attack to your first party member, which also is kind of nice to use with the dot characters too, if you plan to use her in the dot team in replace of Ruame. Not saying she's better than Ruame, but she is a decent option you can use. And then just in general, if you are using her in a more supportive build, you can use her in Broken Keel, like if maybe you have used back in the day. So on and so forth, you get the gist. She's a very flexible character. You kind of just use whatever you have farmed for the character, or what is most cost effective for your account in general. But yeah, she can be a decently hard character to build if you are looking to give her a ton of speed, a ton of crit damage, and a ton of attack, and then of course make sure she has enough effect rate to actually land her debuffs. She can be pretty hard to build. It is relatively satisfying to use her in the in-game contents with a build that feels pretty darn hard to farm for the character, in my opinion. Now for light cone choices, I'm still using Incessant Rain because I've sunk cost fallacy, okay? Sunk cost fallacy. That is the only reason why I'm using this light cone. This light cone sucks because it gives so much effect hit rate, so you end up essentially having so much effect hit rate over what you actually need for the character because of recent changes, right? And the crit rate you don't make advantage of right away, so it ends up being pretty, like, yeah, it's not as good as it could be. And then the Aether Code damage increase, right, is good, but it's a random target, right? So it's kind of annoying to use. I really wish that it was like this light cone got. In my opinion, this light cone was probably, of all light cones, need to be buffed, because her 4-star light cone is still really competitive to this light cone. So this light cone has no incentive to be rolled for, which is very surprising to me that this didn't even get buffed in the first place. But like I said, before the tutorial mission, her 4-star signature light cone you can use on a character because you get more energy against defense reduced enemies, which is very nice for getting her ultimate right in the first turn, getting her ultimate just over the duration of the fight. Very, very nice. And then the effect rate you do get, the 40%, like I said, it is a ton of effect rate, so you have to be mindful of what you already have on your relics in general. But considering you get this light cone from the Herta shop now, with, you know, and back in the day, you had to, like, if you didn't have this light cone, it would be in your best interest to not roll for Silver Wolf, because there was few other light cones you could use on the character, and this was the best option, and it just wasn't available until a certain point in Honkai Star. Thank goodness they ended up adding it to the shop. Now you have the option to roll for this light cone if you don't already have it, which is really, really nice. A W from Hoyoverse, rare W, right? Rare W. But you also have Boundless Courier if you want more damage on the character, right? Because you do apply the defense shred to the enemies, which means you'll take advantage of the full passive of the light cone. And this is a gacha light cone, so again, if you don't have like dupes for it, or you don't have it at all, that is completely understandable. There is RNG involved with getting this light cone in general. And then last but not least, we have Resolution Shines, which does give even more defense shred on the enemy, which does add up quite a bit. It does help with dishing out your final damage, especially if you're not using her in a team with another character like Cypher or Pela, who also already give defense shred. If you're using her as a solo defense shredder, this light cone gets even more value. It is extremely good on the character still. Also, you do get more debuffs too to apply to the enemy, but it's not like you really need this light cone to apply debuffs, because she already applies a ton of debuffs in her kits, and enemies, okay, excuse me, that is with her items, which we'll get into in a moment. with Acheron, you don't need this light cone to apply debuffs. She already applies a lot of debuffs on her own every single turn with her basic attack. Now, since she is a character that has been reran a multitude of times, and she is now rerunning again, I'm sure a lot of you may have already obtained this character in the past. So her Eidolons have gotten several buffs. Let's talk about them. Her first Eidolon now is extremely valuable because now it is AoE, right? And you dish out a ton of more damage. So you just take more advantage of the Eidolon giving you more energy, right, over the course of the fights, to then use her ultimate even more and then get more damage out from the sheer amount of ultimates you are throwing out over the duration of the fight. It is an extremely strong first Eidolon following the recent buffs of the character, and this matters a lot more if you are using her as a damage dealer or using her as a character to buff the damage of your other characters. Eidolon 2 is extremely good now. This is the one that got the biggest change in my opinion, because now you are able to increase the damage taken by the enemies perma, right? It is a perma free 20% vulnerability damage taken by the enemies, which is extremely strong. It is a different type of damage increase or final damage increase compared to other debuffs or buffs in the game. So it is extremely valuable. And it starts as soon as you enter the fight. So if you are using Custoris, right, which I like using her with Silverwolf now, Custoris' dragon will take full advantage in the beginning of the fight with the damage taken increase by the enemies, which is really, really nice. And you may end up even getting the defense down in the enemies because this now ends up applying a bug randomly to the enemy after you attack, right, with an ally character. So if you are using Custoris in the beginning, right, with the dragon, you can end up applying the defense down right away, and then the damage taken increase by 20%, which actually ends up giving you a pretty sizable damage difference in the beginning of the fight with the dragon, right? I'm sure you all know how Custoris works at this point. So post-editing Toshi here, I was recording footage for the video you're watching right now using Acheron and Silverwolf E2 plus, right? E2 Silverwolf is bigger than I thought for Acheron. I actually had not tested E2 Silverwolf with Acheron until now. The debuffs that Silverwolf allows the allies to place onto the enemy, right, the bugs, also proc the passive ultimate of Acheron, so it gives her stacks towards her ultimate. So legit, you can have a team full of characters that don't have any debuffs in their kit as long as you have E2 Silverwolf, and those characters are going to give stacks to Acheron every time they do any attack, whether it's a single target or AoE attack. They will apply the bug debuff that will always land on the enemy, and that in turn is going to give Acheron more stacks towards ultimate. So Silverwolf E2 allows you to pretty much skip every future debuffing character for Acheron's team, which is insanely high value. And E2 Silverwolf is busted on her own for other teams. So if you are an Acheron main or a future Acheron main, assuming I'm sure Acheron will get buffs in the future at some point, right? E2 Silverwolf will be an absolute game changer for you. I promise. Oh my goodness, it is insanely good, as you'll probably watch in the video. I wouldn't have cleared this content otherwise if it wasn't for Silverwolf E2 giving the bugs access to the allies. I would have not cleared Memory Chaos 12 with Acheron otherwise. Eidolon 4 and Eidolon 6 remains unchanged. The only difference now is that it is now an AoE attack with the ultimate, so that this Eidolon is a lot more valuable. So if you are looking to go pretty further to Silverwolf, at this point, she becomes the main DPS in the team, and you don't need to use any other DPS because you're going to be dealing the most DPS with her in a hypercarry setup than you would with any other character team with her. But I still use her in a Custoris because, listen, I love that character, right? My favorite character to use in the game currently. Now, when we're looking at teams for Silverwolf, she is extremely flexible in the game currently. She's not a Tribby, right? She's not the best, most super duper flexible character you can use in every single freaking team and be the best in those teams. No, not Tribby. But she is another Cypher, essentially. And I think that's the beauty of the character. So I use her in the Custoris team because she has the quantum, right, damage, you know, and it really is nice with a character like Custoris, who also is a quantum damage dealer. So just in general, you're able to apply the res down in the enemy, which increases the damage of your Custoris. You already get that from Tribby, but the enemies in endgame content have so much res. So any res shred you can get will end up making your characters dish out a ton of damage. And since I already have Eidolons on Silverwolf, the vulnerability, damage taken, right, by the enemies is extremely valuable. And the random bug is also extremely valuable because Custoris is nothing but AoE attacks, Hysilens is nothing but AoE attacks, and Tribi is nothing but AoE attacks. So pretty much at over the duration of the fight, your defense down is being utilized by Hysilens, Tribi, Custoris, and even Silverwolf herself. And the bugs that are implanted because I have Eidolons on the character is also being taken advantage of by Hysilens, Tribi, and Custoris because they're all AoE attacks. She is extreme. She is better than Cypher to use in this team if you have Eidolons. And that's because, again, her kit buffs the damage of all the characters here. And what happens is, again, you just make use of the kits, right? Much better than you would in any other team. Now, if you are planning to still use her as a buffer or a debuffer, not a single target debuffer, man, I gotta get that out of my head. If you can still use her in the mono-quantum team, right? The thing is, Archer is do we even need to compare him to Seal, right? He is Seal times 100. So Silverwolf gains tremendous value because of that. Sparkle also gains tremendous value because of that. So essentially, this team variation of Mono Quantum is much, much better. And this team is actually pretty competitive in the in-game contents because, again, this team in general, because of Archer, ends up dealing a ton of damage in the recent Silverwolf buffs. So this team is really, really nice. And if you have like Eidolon's Fruzwan, she takes advantage of Silverwolf, like me. You end up dealing a ton of massive damage, right, with the ultimate and base attack, all that jazz, whatnot. You get the gist. Sparkle is just here for, buffs, emotional support, all that. She actually does end up giving a lot of attack percentage and damage bonus and maybe crit damage depending on like your planar set and all that jazz to Silverwolf. Or even you can just, if you're using Archer, you probably wouldn't use your skill on Silverwolf, but you just end up giving a ton of extra bonus stats to Silverwolf for existing, right? Because she's a quantum character. So Silverwolf ends up dealing a lot more damage on a team like this. But because of how broken Tribi is, Tribi just ends up increasing the final damage of Silverwolf much more. And now we have the old Acheron team. The thing is with the Acheron team is that I do not have Cypher or JQ. So this team is not as good as it could be. I would replace like Robin with Cypher or JQ if I had them, just for more debuffs in general. But Robin is the best of both worlds. She gives attack and action forward to the whole team. So it makes up for having one less debuffer in the team in general. Even though Cypher does get a lot of actions because of how fast she is as a character, we don't need to get into that. But you get the gist, right? Silverwolf is pretty nice to use alongside Cypher because you increase the damage of Cypher, but Cypher also increases the damage of you and everyone else in the team, and Acheron is another debuff, right? If you are using Resolution on the character, for example. Any freaking ways, Acheron alongside the newly buffed Silverwolf is extremely good now. So if you are still an Acheron fan, still an Acheron fan, right? If you are still an Acheron fan, you can take advantage of Silverwolf, which is really, really nice. This is the biggest patch for Acheron in a very, very, very long time, following Cypher's release in 3.3 and then Silverwolf's buffs in 3.4. Now, this team I've been trying out as of recently, and I've actually been liking the team quite a bit. The only issue is that it is not an auto-friendly team whatsoever, and I only like teams that are friendly in auto, which is why I really like the Custoris team. I feel like I glaze that character a lot more than I've ever glazed any character, even Silverwolf, which makes a lot of sense. Now, anyways, this team is actually pretty darn decent, and the reason why is because for enemies that do not have the imaginary weakness, Silverwolf can implant it, right? She also does give res down, which is nice. She also does give defense down, which is also pretty nice. And with Eidolons, you give the damage taken increase, and you also do apply the random bugs with the team. For AoE attackers like Rappa and even your Harmony MC, you're going to find them in this team comp to be pretty darn good. So I really like using her in the Rappa Break Effect team. Now, it isn't like the craziest team you can use, and Fugue still has way more value than Silverwolf. But she is a decent alternative, right? Decent, if I didn't make that clear enough, decent alternative that I have still been working with. Rappa ends up dealing tremendous amounts of damage, though. I will say that. She ends up dealing tremendous amounts of damage. But I feel like you just make more use of Fugue. The only issue is that I don't have Fugue, and this is the best I can use. But that's Silverwolf. and she is a very strong pickup in the current patch. So if you are someone who is looking to make your account better, or even just make your account more flexible in terms of teams you can build, Swordwolf is not a bad pickup whatsoever. I would say she is a top 3 contender for best pickups in the patch, maybe even top 2, right? Hysilens and Swordwolf, spoiler alert, because Cerydra is just not it. We'll talk about her. In Honkai Star, where characters like Robin and Tribi exist, there is zero reason why a character like Cerydra should exist in her current state. Zero reason. All it does is make players essentially skip for characters like this. Essentially, Cerydra is not as valuable as a character like Robin in the current meta, and that is very, very disheartening because she has a very, very good design. The thing is, Honkai Star does not miss with its character designs. Some of the best in the gacha market. And for them to make a character like Cerydra have as good of a design as she does have, be as niche as she is for the current meta, is extremely disheartening when we have characters like Rappa, or when we have characters like Robin and Tribi existing. I keep saying Rappa, dude. There's something wrong with me. Rappa pilled. Any freaking ways. Robin is essentially what Hysilens, now I'm saying Hysilens. Robin is essentially what Cerydra should have been the benchmark for, right? Or should have aimed to be close to. And the reason why is because Cerydra already gives attack percent, or attack to the teammate she buffs. It is single target. She does give like personal damage, which is also like single target. And she also does give buffs to the ally, furthermore. Skill damage, right? Skill crit damage, which is also single target. So she is way less flexible, which means she is now only used in hyper carry teams first and foremost. She gives attack percentage and an HP and various other, scaling meta. It is pretty rough to use her if you have a bunch of HP scaling characters on your team, or just in your account in general. And recent Jinglu changes, right, becoming an HP scaling character, means that Cerydra now has even less value, because that is another character that she is not able to buff. And it would have been extremely good if she was able to buff a character like Jinglu, because Jinglu could have used that really, really nicely. The one thing that I think Cerydra really need to do that they didn't do for the character is essentially make her a damage bonus and skill damage increase character. I think even though she would have gave a ton of damage bonus, she would have still been a lot better to use in general. Making her niche with her being attack percent boosting and skill damage is really, really bad, because essentially what she becomes is a Phynon and a Naxos slave, which is what she currently is right now in Honkai Star. You can try to use her in a team with like Archer, like Seal, maybe, but it's just not worth it. It's just not worth it when there's other characters that can rival that. For instance, Sparkle, who you may already have on your account for those quantum skill damage characters, and again, it's you without a doubt would already be using Sparkle for your Archer team anyways. But Cerydra would just be like a second slot. But there's no point when there's characters like, for instance, Tribi, or even a character like Robin existing. So her value is just not there. Harmony is the most competitive path in the game. There's no reason why any Harmony character at this point should be niche, because they've already taken that leap and making Harmony characters not niche. So for them to make a niche Harmony character is bad. It just won't cut it anymore. Tribi giving res pen all type to the team, perma, giving so many DDD advanced forwarding, AoE just buffs for the team in general, with the damage taken by the enemies increase, her own personal damage, even true damage of her first Eidolon. She is just really good. Super flexible, universal, that's fine. Robin, very flexible, gives team-wide action forwarding, attack percent to the whole team, is that unlike Bronya, she is still niche, even more. Nicher than Bronya, which is crazy. Bronya gives damage bonus with her elemental skill. Sunday gives crit rate, crit damage with his skill, right? Ultimate. Cerydra attack percent, and skill damage. Why? Why? I guess I didn't even talk about Sunday, who are the real single target buffers. I've only been talking about Robin and Tribby. I don't even know how I'm going to cut up this rant, but take it from someone who has every single Harmony character in the game and has not skipped anyone. Cerydra is the first character I really should arguably skip because I don't have any of the characters she is going to really make a difference for. Even though I really do like the character design, she is just the worst Harmony character we have received yet. And not saying she is a bad character, she's just the worst Harmony character we have received in terms of her being extremely niche, right? She's going to be great for Finon. She's going to be great for main DPS and Naxa. But again, she's just niche, and that's the problem with the character. And unfortunately, again, she just doesn't warrant me rolling for the character as of right now. In the future, we would maybe receive more skill damage focused characters that are also attack skill. I mean, like, it's not going to be anytime soon because we have a bunch of HP scaling characters in the meta and are probably receiving more HP scaling characters in the future. So I wouldn't hold your breath on it. It'll be like the Sparkle case where it's like a wait and see moment. And then with the release of Archer, then Sparkle became a much better character with a much stronger presence in the meta, right? She's going to be like Sparkle. There's a wait and see moment. And that's okay. Not every character, I guess, needs to be universal, but it sucks, man, because this is like one of the few characters that I feel like needed to be something more than what the current meta offered, but they really missed the mark with her by making her extremely niche as they did. But that's it. That's pretty much the video here. I don't have any of the characters that Cerydra buffed, so I can't really show any of the characters. It's not even worth rolling for Seal or Archer because I already have the characters that make those characters good. So unfortunately, it is what it is. She is the worst pull value in the patch as of right now, even though she should be the best because she's a Harmony character. Harmony characters are always the best pull value, no matter the patch. But she ends up being the first and worst pull value in terms of Harmony we've ever had, which is crazy. I'm even saying this. Thank you for watching, and have a nice rest of your day. Good luck to whoever you decide to pull for. I'm still most likely going for Cerydra just because of design alone. But man, I have to hope that they either buff Seal to make her more skill damage focused, buff her multipliers, or either release another skill damage focused character in the future that is attack scaling that I end up enjoying the playstyle of that's not Finon. We'll see. Bye-bye.